What I find, so obviously looking at GPT-4 now, right? It's, they've got three different options. They got the legacy, which is 3.5. They've got GPT-4, which is just literally launched yesterday. And it's saying that it's better at reasoning, it's better at speed, it's better at consciousness. You've had the chance to have 24 hours of use, hands-on use. In your opinion, what have you seen as great capabilities that have kind of come out within GPT-4 that people should be aware of?
Well, I think the way I'd look at it is it's made me feel more confident I can get some real value out of it. So I played with version 3.5, had some fun with it, asked it some questions, talked about requirements and looking to test requirements, looked at generating some code. There's some interesting stuff, and then said, well, can I generate the tests? And so it could, and then test data, and so it could. And it seemed to me that the building blocks are beginning to emerge of how you can put, if you like, a complete test process together, but you can put a complete software development process together. It's going to help in all sorts of areas. And it's a bit like it's a box of tools that we haven't got the manual for yet. We've got to figure it out as we go along and learn. So there's obviously multiple formulas to be used to do intelligent tasks and to shift intelligence, tasks that require intelligence onto the tool. Now, what I did yesterday is I managed to get access to version 4, Chat GPT-4, and I'm just looking at generating content for a website. And it's remarkable in that what I'm beginning to believe is that what we do as users of these products is we are, if you like, specifiers. And so we have to prepare the tool with some background information. We need to suggest that these are what I'm trying to achieve in the next 5-10 minutes. These are the things that I want you to talk about. These are the questions I want you to answer, and just give it all this information. Now, a lot of this can be driven by the need to get yourself up the search rankings in Google, because it's a web page, of course. And so you can use Google AdWords to tell you what keywords are really critical, and then add those to the list of things that this article should mention. And if you like, what we're doing when we're using tools like this, and I'm just talking about generating web content, what we're actually doing is specifying what the tool should do for us. And in the same way, it's a bit like specifying code and writing code. I don't know what the exact relationship is, but I feel that what I'm trying to do is I'm defining some preconditions, some input data that exists, some rules that you've got to follow, some features that you've got to deliver and implement, the messages you want to get out, and so on and so forth. And then you let the tool do its thing. And so I think you have to think much more like a specifier than a copywriter. And so if you like, the way you draft a packet of work for a copywriter, you're doing exactly the same thing, but for ChatGPT. I think there's some variation in how you do that, and there's some mechanisms you can use to make it really quite slick. For example, the keywords. If the keywords are relevant to you and the content on your website, one of the things you can do is say, mention these keywords, and then when you get the copy, to replace all those keywords with the keyword with a link on it. So it will point to one of your web pages and so on and so forth. And so it seems to me that the whole notion of creating copy can be automated to a degree, or specifying it is manual, okay, or intellectual, let's say. The generation of it can be automated, but that's kind of 90%. That's all the sweat, the perspiration, not inspiration stuff. And then with a little bit of automation, you can take that content and scan it for all the links that you want to have, which will point to stuff that you really want to introduce to your audience. And so just thinking about producing copy for a web page, I think what will emerge over the next few months is publicly shared processes for generating excellent web content, because what I've read so far, it's really good. Being a Brit, like you, we are slightly less arrogant, or we are more modest, or whatever, in how we talk about the stuff we're interested in and passionate about. Whereas the Americans obviously have a knack of being a bit more, I won't say pushy, but you know what I mean. I did say pushy, yeah. But so it's like really kind of, it takes a burden off you in that you don't have to sort of agonize over what to say in text. And a lot of writing is struggling over a single sentence to craft a message that is going to have meaning. And of course, Chat GPT isn't perfect. You have to read what it produces, and you're going to tinker and edit it, I'm sure, from here or there. But just for producing copy, I'll never go back to doing this manually. That's it. I'm done with that. Now, would I write an article in the same way? Not so sure, because one of the things that you're living off, with Chat GPT is it's only using stuff it's already found on the internet to generate stuff anew. Now, that's great if you are defining a business that's been done a million times before, with products that it's known about, it's got millions of references and so on. That's fine. But if you're trying to introduce a new idea to the industry, and between us, we work hard to try and be original in this respect, you've still got that problem, so you still have to. So I'd be reluctant to take a commission to write 3,000-word article and say, well, give me a few keywords, I'll press a button and I'll have it to you within the hour. I don't think that's viable, but I've no doubt people are going to be doing that.
Yeah.
And I think there are checkers which can spot AI as being here, if you know what I mean. But again, something I saw in passing was ChatGPT is very close to fooling those checks, or passing those checks. So historically, we've had link checkers on HTML pages, but now we've got kind of crafted by AI checks, which I think there's going to be a war between them of how clever can ChatGPT get, how clever can the checkers get, and so on and so forth. But I'm really excited about it, and there's lots more to do with that. I've just talked about web page generation, but I'm having ideas all over the dartboard, for stuff that we could do with it, and we can explore some of those as well. I think too.
No, and I love it, and I love that you've kind of targeted the digital grind, the tasks that you do, which, like you said, sometimes are just the procrastinating of around a sentence or something like that, and maybe those items can disappear. I remember back in 2012 when I did a keynote at Star West, I talked about banning all email, and that email took 12 years per day just in the US alone was spent reading emails. Obviously, that's going to dramatically increase. For it to read your emails, identify the tasks that need to be done, push those into a backlog, and then start helping you through, assisting you to get some of those tasks, because 90% of them are digital grind, maybe are paper pushing, a proxy of information across. But I think you've hit the nail on the head in the sense of, well, original content is slightly different. Now, if you're wanting to feed into it, say, for instance, this conversation we're having right now, we want to transcribe it and then pass that over and say, I'm going to give you a piece of text. I would like you to summarize, well, what are the main talking points? What are the use cases for generative AI for testers, right? And you talked about, leading it into that kind of area. And I think a new model for testing, when you put that together, one of those was sources of knowledge. Now, the internet is a source of knowledge. However, I think where we've seen the shift from traditional manual following scripts to exploratory and having like a mission or a charter to say, okay, well, I'm going in this with, I'm going to check payment processing, and that's my mission today. In a way, you've got missions every day. And can ChatGPT help the average tester to have superpowers to be able to maybe write automation when they're not fluent with automation, or write an API test, or write a requirement? Do you see testing use cases coming out of this?
Absolutely. So what's been demonstrated when the feed that the Chat GPT guys put out a couple of nights ago, they demonstrated a couple of things. One was a sketch on the back of a napkin of a web application, which from just uploading a scan of that picture, this hand-drawn, badly drawn picture, it generated a workable web page, which basically told jokes and not very sophisticated, but that's kind of clever. But by the same token, if you upload an image of a screen, of a screen you're going to test, you can say, describe in minute detail everything you see, in particular and I'm just thinking aloud now, but you can say, in particular, paying attention to the labels of the fields, which give you the name of the field, the structure of the field, the size, whether it's numeric, whether it's text, whatever, if you can identify that, and start thinking about how you would test input validation on those fields. Now, you wouldn't do it in that way, perhaps. You'd probably do it in stages. But what you might end up with is like a table of all the fields, their names, their formats, and then say, right, I've got my secret source, which I've uploaded just now to Chat GPT, which says how you test dates, how you test currencies, how you test Booleans in combination, and you could give it some heuristics, dare I say, and then say, use those heuristics to generate as many test cases that you think have value without duplication. Go. And it will generate many more test cases than you probably think of for yourself if you had no other support, if you had no other hints than your head, what's in your head. So I can certainly see that. And with code, it's better than that, because you can upload the code and say, generate a covering set of tests. Now, right now, we need, what's missing is it'll just generate some tests. You think, well, what does that cover? It looks like 50 test cases of a 50-line piece of Java or Python or whatever it is. And it'll generate the code to actually run the tests. So the unit tests will just get generated. Now, that's probably better than what developers are doing right now, because they don't like testing their developer and so on. But if you also give it some additional information, like we measure coverage by looking at the pathways through code that exercise the outcomes of decisions. Now, you probably have to formulate that definition in a more user-friendly or Chat GPT-friendly way. But if you could define a coverage measure and then say, generate tests that achieve 100% branch coverage in this code. Go. And that is almost certainly better than the level of testing that any developer today would try and achieve, unless they were in the high integrity arena with tools that measured coverage and all that kind of game. And that's really important. But I think somebody who doesn't have those tools could achieve quite a lot without them. And the nice thing about it is you can keep that conversation and the outputs from it. And if the code changes, you edit the code and say, regenerate those tests. Throw away all the code you've just generated. You don't need that anymore. It's only a means to an end. And so you could have a kind of it would fit very nicely into a test-driven development regime as well. As you write the code, you generate the tests as you go. And the one thing the developers hate doing is writing tests and running them. And yet that's what it's going to do for you. And if at the very least, you're going to have a very good regression set, because you could craft the specification of the testing by saying, create tests that cover the code changes we've just made. Just do it. Like getting developers to do that is like, it's almost impossible, and although developers know TDD has value, they still see it as more time consuming than writing the code, running a few tests, shipping it. So I think there's fantastic opportunities. Right now, you can't upload images into Chat GPT. They've not released that, but they demonstrated it as a capability. I think they're doing the safety thing. It might be months before we get that, but when we do get that, that would be really interesting. So you look at code, and you can look at images of web pages or mobile apps and that kind of stuff. I think it's really interesting. I'm not saying exciting. It is exciting because it's fun, but is it going to take over the world? Don't know, but it's getting there. It really is getting there. which is
And
remarkable.
it is, yeah. And so back at Automation Guild, I did a demo around eggplant generating some gherkin syntax. So originally it was a quote from Jason about is stock price a reference for quality, which was obviously quite fictional, but it was played. It was on a thread with Alan Page, and so I created asked it to create a gherkin script to how I would find out the stock price of Microsoft. I then created that gherkin script into a model, so a model-based testing approach. So I created a model, and then out of that model, I then asked it to go off and generate not only the code to write the actual application, which would go off and find the stock prices over the last 12 months for Microsoft, and visualize it on an app. So it built the actual app itself, but it then also created all the Selenium scripts for each one of the pages, ran those and validated them with similar kind of things, and tested under the hood at the API level. And actually that was Chat GPT 3.5, but actually you've hit a bit of a nail on the head that actually from a requirements engineering perspective and a test impact analysis, if I'd have said, actually, I only want to know, I want to be sent an alert whenever the stock price drops by X%, I would refine the requirements. I'd make changes to requirements. Of course, that would have a test impact on what the tests are. It would also have to regenerate the code from a whole SDLC, from an organic kind of, the bit of code test, this impossible kind of triangle that we've had before, and requirements. How do we manage that in a really good way? Actually, you're starting to see how these large language models could actually apply. Now, where I think it's really interesting, I think you just hit it on the head with the TDD. If you remember kind of where Dan North went with the behavior-driven development, then the next step, acceptance test-driven development, and people like, Elizabeth Hendrickson, they'd have at the top, this field must not be, it can't be a negative value, or it should not be, transfers over 1,000 euros or something. Part of it is there's some rules that would be put in there, which are more context specific. And I think this is where actually I think ChatGPT comes into its own, because if you're not familiar with derivatives or FX, and you're going through and testing an application which is doing some money transfer and you're expecting it to go into a certain currency in another account, how do you test that without understanding all the flows around FX? Actually, now you can say to it, I'm testing a financial exchange. I'm going to do a transfer of 100 euros into $100, which is pretty much the same money now. But, in actual fact, how would I test it? What do I need to think about? What are the edge cases of, okay, if, the FX changes tomorrow, of course, the numbers are going to be different. I'm going to have to validate different numbers. So I always need to be going off to an oracle to find some information. So I'm going to call it meta modeling for a second, because it's metadata supported into the modeling process, fed in from something like ChatGPT. But do you see it being addressing the context aware camp of, well, you need to understand the domain as well as the actual testing discipline, because you've got all this additional knowledge. You can do banking, investment banking, you can do legal, you can do medical. It's past the bar. It's a medical outperforms a medical doctor after 5 years. It's past ISTQB. Does that mean it's a better tester? But is it better than a lawyer? Right. So do you see combining both of those as a potential next step?
I think you can do that now. Yeah. I if you like, again, I'll just use the example of writing copy. If you like, what the first step is to define the context. So here is the text introducing this organization on its home page. Here is the mission statement of this organization's. Write me an article that encourages people to volunteer to be part of it, and so on and so forth, and drive like that. But what is the purpose of putting the homepage text and the mission statement up there up front? That's defining the context. So in the same ways, when you have a piece of code, you could say, here's 50 lines of code, and I'm going to test. Fantastic. Here's some context to the application. It's foreign exchange, it's this and that and the other. And there's probably some standard text you could lift from a document already in the organization if it's well specified, let's say. And you could add all that as context. And now test in the context of a user using this application to transfer $1 billion from A to B. It's incredibly, so make damn sure this works. I mean, you're basically encouraging it to think very seriously about a very deep and thorough level of testing. Now, I don't know, I mean, let's say it thinks. It doesn't think, it's not a human, but if it has the data to think deeply about questions of risk and potential and probability and of failure and the consequences of failure to drive tests, world's your oyster. That's much better than any human can do right now, you know, because the context might be super complex, you know, and not many people understand everything they need to know about testing the software they've got in front of them. They might say, well, I'm a systems tester, I can test anything, sure, but are they a business domain expert? Probably not. Have they experience of failures in the past of this application? Not to the degree that you could upload a list of all the bugs that have ever occurred in this application and say, pick the bones out of that. Now, right now, you can't do that. You can't just throw, you know, massive quantities of data at Chat GPT, but that day will come, you know. And so it seems to me it's only going in one direction. I'm not thinking very deeply about it yet, but I can't think of anything superficially that it couldn't do that would support a human tester. You know, I think there's value right across the piece in defining requirements, in writing code, in creating tests, in refining tests, in encouraging it to think about coverage in certain ways. And if you have a formal specification, you can just give it the formal specification and just let it pick the bones out of that. So if you define everything in terms of X machines or state transition table, a state table, and just say, give me a covering set of tests for this state table, it'll just do it. I think it knows enough to do that. I haven't tried that, but my expectation is it will be able to do that. But this is the kind of thing that we need to experiment with and explore. So, but right now, I'm kind of excited that the possibility is there to do some really, really clever stuff, stuff.
And I think to your last point, and I think this is where I see the natural evolution of this, is you think of all those organizations that have got all those requirement specifications, they've got all those historical bugs, they've got all those test cases that they've written, they've got all this documentation, they've got all these Visio diagrams, they've got all these CMDB kind of databases of information. Once you're able to get that metadata down to a consumable format, then you can train it against that by saying, here's, you know, my current requirements specification. Is there any, you know, is it ambiguous? You know, is there any holes in it? Learn this the way that we do payment processing with our rules, which is different to maybe the external sources of knowledge from systems, which it's learned from the internet facing. Because, of course, your special source is maybe documented in your own internal resources. So I can see people in the way we've got public, and private cloud starting to deploy these kind of models within their own organization and learn their organization. And then the uses of from HR to infrastructure, you know, deploy me this in one of our, you know, VPN locations. It will understand a lot more. Of course, that is a few years off. But I think what we've taken from this, which is obviously day one experience, is that we've got to learn to be able to ask the right questions, a bit like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know, say if you ask it what the meaning of life is, it'll come back with, or what the infinite question is, it'll come back with 42. I think we need to get better at, well, what are the questions and the string patterns that we need to ask and how we refine that to maximize our usefulness of this, and then understanding limitations of what can it do, what can't it do, what shouldn't it do from an ethical perspective, right? We're not looking at just removing people by replacing them. It's actually human augmentation. And if anything, it's augmented testing through the power of being able to provide testers with superpowers. And so, you know, that's where, I'd like, maybe we'll revisit this in a later podcast once it's got image-based capability. And or it might have even written it, because it does support text to video. So in theory, if he does text to avatar, then we're out of a job as well, because we'll be digitalizing our testers like Jason's thinking about from testers.ai.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's so fascinating about it. So you're absolutely right. We need to understand how to have a conversation. It's a conversation. So it's not like, here's some code, test this, press a button, it's done. No, it's never going to work that way. Well, I don't think it's ever going to work that way, not in my lifetime anyway. So you're quite right. One of the things is the questions we ask and say, oh, don't forget to think about this, don't forget to think about that. And there's also the notion of principles or rules that it should follow. So, you remember the little black book I wrote with axioms in. Now, some people don't agree there are axioms in testing. Well, fine. I think they help. But what I might actually do is there are 16 axioms in a little book. Post those into Chat GPT, give it some context about a project, and then say, write me a test strategy. I made my living for about 15 years writing test strategies of some scale. And I honestly think a lot of it was not, copperplate, not templated, but the thought process was the complex stuff, and then the context came in and drove the content as it was generated. That would be an interesting little exercise to do, over a couple of hours, and to see what it would come up with. Because you could limit it and say, look, write it in 3 pages. And we'd all love to see test plans, strategies, where they have to be produced, nice and compact and short. And I think the potential is there for it to do a much better job than we would do in terms of the text. So, but you're right. So there's the questions we ask. Let's use the word axioms, rules, principles, call them what you like, that it should apply, the constraints, if you like. Then there's purposes, whatever, and it's a bit like a specification. But the conversation is trying to get that specification out of your head in a fuzzy way into the tool in a structured way. And that will take 2 or 3 or more iterations to do that. And I think it's a conversation that leads to an output. And you might not actually get the output immediately. You might have to have a half hour to and fro refining the spec before you say, go, give me the final result. Or give me an outline and I'll look at the outline and now write the full thing. So I think these processes that we haven't had to do before are accelerated, that's for sure. Because how long would it take to get a strategy out the door? Months, weeks, sometimes. Sorry, weeks and months sometimes. Because you need to have meetings with senior people and they're not available. And if you can pick their brains in a way that if you can get them to articulate what they want, it's usually very simple. The more senior you go, the less content they need to provide. But if you've got that, I think there's opportunities to do some remarkable stuff. And it doesn't, not limited to testing, of course. I mean, it could do all sorts of things. So, I was a bit of a skeptic a year or 2 ago, but I'm getting quite excited about it now because it's moved on so quickly, hasn't it? And every week there's new announcements.
And I think, one of the things you did last year with the terminologies side of things is actually using the correct, understanding the language, right? So, these
and that fits really nicely into the keywords and all sorts of stuff. It's I'm definitely going to use that. Sorry, you are interrupted.
Oh, no. I think, I'll put a link in for that actual kind of terminology, look up at the different definitions that are used within ISO, ISTQB, different language that's used, because we all describe things in different ways, even in different companies. So a test case, a test script, they can all have different multiple meanings depending on which viewpoint you are, what persona you are. So actually bridging that gap and maybe even Chat GPT extending into understanding definitions, and I'm hopefully it's even indexed your little terminology link to actually allow us to kind of bridge those gaps so that everyone understands what they mean when they say X, Y, Z in terminology from testing, but also understand the breadth of maybe terminology and especially abbreviations that are used within an organization. So feeding those kind of meta models in, I think actually we start harmonizing this kind of the terminology that we use and actually in the understanding that we're using. And what I think you've kind of said, which is actually blown my mind slightly, is that actually if you do this from a an enterprise scale, then these models are refined by multiple augmented intelligence from humans in the loop.
Yeah.
So a stakeholder is conversing with Chat GPT to say, well, actually, we're now very good. We're going to have to increase the risk level on this before it goes to market, because actually the insurance now won't cover us. So they make a decision at a high level. That means many things for many other teams. They're all refining this model of, well, what is it that the goal is of the organization and the mission, like you kind of said. Actually, that can change based on appetite for investment, the current tech climate, reduction in skills based on jobs that have been maybe lost, and knowledge that's been lost within an organization that still exists in hopefully documentation, if depending on how they read the Agile Manifesto. But part of it is that now can be fed back in to actually allow this brain of your organization to actually continuously learn about how things change within your organization, how it needs to be tested, and provide a level of assurance.
I think there are products, not testing products, but there are products now becoming available which will scan the content of all the documentation in your organization, for example. And most companies still have an awful lot on paper, but a lot of it is digital, of course. And then interpreting stuff from that. But I still think there's a requirement for humans to put their, if you like, they should be doing context, mission statements, goals, risks. And that's all usually low quantity of data, but it's critical to everything else that follows. Now, all the detail is stuff that computers can do better than humans, but we should be concentrating on the big picture, the mission, the risks, goals, money, people, big things,
Process.
So I can't see a limit to where this is going, which makes me sound like a real evangelist, and I don't mean to be like that. I just think the last few weeks have opened my eyes to what is potentially possible, and a lot of it we can't do yet, but we're going to get there. We're definitely 5 years time, we won't be having this conversation. It'll all be, well, we're doing this all the time now. It's not going to go away. It's like a juggernaut. It's it's exciting. I have to say so. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll check back in a few weeks, and we'll see, how it's progressed on, and if we can find any more use cases that we can share with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely.